Monojika?
Yes, sir.
I think we can start.
Okay. So, good evening, everyone, and welcome all participants to the AIRY West Bengal Clinical Oncology course. Today, we'll be discussing the last and the final module of this course, which is on palliative care. So palliative care is care beyond cure. It is an important aspect in cancer care because those who are suffering from advanced cancers and life-threatening illnesses, it not only aims at providing relief of symptoms but also improves their quality of life and provides a holistic care, physical, psychosocial, and spiritual. It aims at providing life to their days, not days to their life. So I would request our today's speaker, Dr. Saurabh Guha, consultant clinical oncologist and palliative care specialist, Medica Cancer Center, Siliguri, to present his talk on principles of palliative care. I would request everyone to keep their audio mute. And if they have any question, kindly type it in the chat box. We'll take it after the presentation. So, Dr. Saurabh, please do the presentation. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Just 1 second. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. Good evening, everyone. So today, as per the schedule, we will be talking on the what happened. What happened? Hello, can you all see the screen?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. So we'll be talking on role of palliative care in oncology. So 1 second. The screen not moving.
We can see the screen and also hear you.
Yeah, but I'm not able to move my screen properly. Yeah, now it is moving. Yeah.
Okay.
So as we know that palliative care is the active total care of patients who are suffering from incurable, progressive, life-threatening condition, and also of their families by a multi-professional team. We need to understand that palliative care, it extends further just beyond. Can you see the screen? Because it's going off.
Yeah, we can see it.
I'm not able to see the screen. Yeah, so we need to understand that it is not only about the patient, but also about the families, and it extends further beyond physical care. There is a World Health Organization definition. I think most of us are familiar with it, but I'll still say that according to WHO, palliative care is an approach that improves the quality of life of patients and their families facing the problems associated with life-threatening illness through prevention and relief of suffering by means of early identification, impeccable assessment, and treatment of pain and other problems, physical, psychosocial, and spiritual. So in gist, what they want to say is that we need to understand that here we are not just treating a disease. We are treating the patient as a whole, and not only the patient, but also we have to understand that it is about the patient family also, about whom we need to take care. And it extends not just with the patient treatment, but even after the death. So it includes bereavement therapy as well. One second. Okay, so palliative care provides relief from pain and other distressing symptoms. It affirms life and regards dying as a normal process. And it intends neither to hasten or postpone death. Integrates the psychological, spiritual aspect of patient care and not only the physical aspect. Offers a support system to help the patients live actively as possible until death, and offers family a support system to cope during the patient's illness and also after death in their own bereavement. Now, basically, the aim of palliative care is to bridge the gap between the present reality and the hope or the ambition of the patient, what he or she desires. So basically what it means is that when a patient is suffering from a life-threatening illness, his or her quality of life obviously is affected, but the patient has obviously a high desire to have a good quality of life. So with palliative care, what we intend to do is to bridge the gap. We need to tell the patient that perhaps we will not be able to fulfill his or her entire wishes. We might not give him or her the best quality of life, but we will try to achieve the maximum potential, what is possible for her physically, psychologically, socially, and spiritually. Now, the question comes is that who provides palliative care? The answer is it's a teamwork. In team, as you see, it means together everyone achieves more. So it includes the general practitioner, the hospital consultant, the palliative care specialist, the junior doctors, the nurses, the inpatient nurse, the district nurse, the palliative care nurse, and also the religious leaders and the social workers, who are a very important part of the team. Now, we need to understand that in this team, there is no boss, there is no hierarchy, and each individual is empowered with the right to provide the best possible care. We need to understand that in a country like ours, where the aging population, is growing day by day with a huge population like our country, we need to understand that palliative care cannot be given only by the palliative care specialist. So, as medical professionals, all doctors, nurses, they should have basic training in palliative care so that everyone in the medical field can offer palliative care to patients who really need it. Now, the question comes, who is a palliative care patient? We need to understand there is no cutout that he or she is a palliative care patient. Anyone who is suffering from any chronic illness will need palliative care at some point of time in his or her life. And it is not only about cancer patients. We as oncologists, we sometimes feel that palliative care is only for oncology patients. That is not the case. It is for any patients who is suffering from any chronic debilitating disease. It might be a chronic kidney disease. It might be a chronic liver disease. It might be heart disease. Any patient who are suffering from any chronic illness will require palliative care at some point of time or the other. Now, if you look at this picture, you will see that when any treatment we start with the disease modifying treatment. That is, we want to cure our intention is to cure the patient. But we know with chronic illness, complete cure will not be possible, and a time will come when we will have to understand that we cannot cure the patient entirely. And at that time, it is the role of palliative care which will come into. This is what we think. But as palliative care specialists, we need to understand that this role of palliative care.
Sorry to interrupt.
Can you see now?
No. Yes.
Okay. Can you see now, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So we need to understand that the role of palliative care actually starts from the very beginning. When we start with the curative intent of our treatment, from that time only, the role of palliative care starts. And because we cannot say like today it is not a curable treatment, so from tomorrow the patient is under the palliative team. That cannot happen. The palliative treatment will start at the time you start with the curative treatment, because a time might come in any chronic illness that you might not end up doing a successful treatment. So the palliative care specialist or the palliative team comes into the picture from day one. Okay, and it stops not only after the not only with the death of the patient, but even beyond it, with the bereavement therapy, when we have to help the patient's family to cope up with the loss. So
Sorry, the screen is
thing,
not visible. It is now, yes.
One second. Yeah, it is visible now, na?
Yes.
I don't know what is happening. Some problem is there. Okay, anyways. It is going on and off. That is the problem. Yeah, so can you see this slide, place of care?
It is showing, the place of care is visible. I will suggest you to stop your video so that we can have a better bandwidth probably, and let's see how it works. Okay.
Okay.
But again, the screen is not there.
1 second. 1 second. I've already mailed them. Okay. So regarding the place of care, so where can we offer palliative care to a patient? We can offer obviously at their home, a hospice, a palliative care. 1 second. What is happening? Hospice or palliative care unit. It can be offered in any nursing home or residential care home or any specialized hospital. Can I request something? I have already mailed this. Can that
yes,
be
yes, that's what I was saying.
Yeah, so, because this.
Can you wait for?
I'll stop the share.
Yeah, you stop sharing.
Yeah, sure. Okay. Yeah.
Sorry for the interruption. Just give me 2 minutes. Can you mail it to my ID, please? I'm writing it in because Abhishek, hello, Abhishek, are you there?
Yes, I'm there.
Oh, actually the Euro mail requesting my phone number verification, so it will take time.
Okay,
Okay, so I'm asking him to mail me.
I'll do one thing. I think I have access to the Airway ID. I'll forward the presentation to you. Let him also mail it to you. Okay, whichever
Okay.
happens first.
Okay.
Can we do it from there?
Wait, I'm trying. I don't know. I'm trying to share this mail. So, Shrikant,
Sir,
you're
please
telling me that
please
you have
mail
shared.
me your presentation to the ID I have provided in your chat box.
Jibok, can you please check? I think I have forwarded it to your personal mail ID from the Airway mail.
Okay, just a minute, Dada. Page.
Have you got it?
Yeah, thank you.
Okay.
Jibok, I've already sent you the
Yeah,
presentation.
I have received. Abhishek, just send me also. So let me share my screen. Can you see it? Hello.
Yes, it is visible.
Okay.
Yes, I
so-
can see. I can see
Okay,
clearly.
so
I can
which
see
slide do
clearly.
you want?
This is slide number 9.
Okay. This one?
Yes. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So I will. No, it's okay. Fine. Okay. So it's in
Okay.
this mode. Okay. Thank you.
Okay. So, sorry for the interruption. So the next topic which we need to discuss is pain, because as we know that in palliative care, pain is one of the most important aspects which we have to face as oncologist and as palliative care specialist. When we talk about pain, we think only about the physical aspect of pain, but as palliative care specialist or as oncologist, we need to understand that when a patient comes to us with pain, it is not the physical aspect of pain only that he or she is complaining about. Definitely, the physical aspect is one of the most important, but it is also about the psychological, the spiritual, and the social aspect which we have to take into account. Just imagine a patient, a young patient of 35 years or 40 years of age, suffering from terminal illness. He or she is obviously thinking about her family or his family. He is thinking about why has God given this to me. So he's always fighting with God, the spiritual aspect, the psychological, the social aspect, thinking about his family. So all these things we have to consider and not only concentrate on the physical aspect of pain. So the next slide, when we see, according to the Western literature, pain is reported in about 20 to 25% of all cancer patients. And we see that about 75 to 80% of patients with advanced cancer will definitely experience pain. And in India, where majority of our patients presents to us with stage 3 or stage 4 disease, as we see in our clinics, pain is obviously the most important complaint with which they present during the course of illness. And why we want to discuss here about pain, because if you see the last slide, it is written that unfortunately, even after so many years, standard therapies are very, very inconsistent. Next slide. If you see the last line of the next slide, yeah, the standard therapies are inconsistently applied. When we see patients, we forget the basics. So we need to, when we think of managing a patient with pain, go to the basics, and we have to manage accordingly, because unfortunately we see most of the patients are not managed in a proper way. Next slide. Why it is important? Because a good pain control not only improves the quality of life of patients, but also impacts the survival, which is very important. So a good pain management is an integral part. Next slide. Now, in cancer, we need to understand that the pain can happen due to multifactorial causes. It can happen due to the cancer itself. It can happen because of the cancer treatment. If the patient is undergoing surgery, the pain can happen because of surgery, because of radiation, because of chemotherapy. So because of the treatment itself, any debility associated with cancer, and concurrent and associated disorders. So there can be multifactorial cause. Next slide. So when we see a patient suffering from pain, assessment of pain is very important, and always keep in mind the gold standard is the patient description. Next slide. When you evaluate pain, keep this term in mind. Socrates: site, onset, characteristic, radiation, associated symptoms, the timing of the pain, the exacerbating or the alleviating factors, and the severity. So all these things have to be kept in mind while evaluating a pain. Now, when we talk of pain, next slide, we know that pain can be of two types. It can either be a nociceptive pain, that is a pain caused by damage to the body tissue, or it can be a neuropathic pain. Now, nociceptive pain can be again of two types, physiological or pathological. And the next slide, neuropathic pain. Neuropathic pain is the pain which is caused by damage or disease affecting the somatosensory part of the nervous system. Now, here there are two important terms which, as junior residents, you should always keep in mind, is that dysesthesia. That means the pain can be associated with abnormal sensation, or allodynia, that is the pain from normally non-painful stimuli. So these are the two terms in neuropathic pain which we should keep in mind. And the pain may have continuous and or episodic component. Okay, next slide. Now, the causes of neuropathic pain can be many. It can be because of the cancer itself, or it can be because of compression of a single peripheral nerve. And typically, when the patient comes, they describe the pain as superficial or burning, or a stabbing pain, or a lacerating pain. These are the typical description of a neuropathic pain. Next slide. Yeah, so the causes can be many. As I said, it can be due to the cancer, the anti-cancer treatment, and the concurrent disorders. This we have already discussed. Next slide. Now, when we see a patient with pain, it is important to measure the pain, and there are many tools for measuring. I'll discuss the commonest tools which we use in our clinical practice. That is the visual analog scale. If you look at next slide, this is the card which we often use in our clinical practice. I think in our OPDs we all use this card, where 0 is no pain and 10 is the worst pain. Now 1 to 5 is mild pain, 6 and 7 score is moderate pain, 8, 9, 10 is severe pain. So we tell the patient, please you rate your pain accordingly. And after that, when the rating is done, we have to treat accordingly. So this is the commonest scale which we use in our practice. There are many others, like the next slide, like the verbal description scale, and many scales which can be applied, but the most commonest is the visual analog scale. For children, we sometimes use smileys. We show them the smileys and they rate accordingly, because for them it is very difficult to rate according to the visual analog scale. Now, general principles for cancer pain management is that thorough assessment is required, a very good communication with the patient, reassurance about pain relief, discourage the acceptance of pain, and encourage the patient participation. Reassure the patient that don't worry, we will get you relief from this pain, and you don't have to stay with this pain. So discourage the acceptance of pain. Next. Next slide. So when we think of treating any patient with physical pain, we obviously use the WHO ladder, which is a simple, well-validated and effective method, as we know. And it is effective in about 90% of the patients in treating their pain. So the 5 essential components, next slide, the 5 essential concepts in WHO ladder is by the mouth. Next slide. By the mouth. So by the mouth means always the oral route is the most preferred route. By the clock, that is around the clock or ATC treatment. By the ladder, that is the 3-step analgesic ladder which we have to follow. Individualized treatment, we have to understand that pain for every patient is different. So individualized treatment and supervision. Next. And this is the most important part of the treatment of pain. I think we all are familiar with. This is the WHO 3-step pain ladder. We need to understand that when we start in the first step, we use a non-opioid. Example of non-opioid are NSAIDs like ibuprofen, or paracetamol can be used, plus minus adjuvant. When and if the pain is not controlled, go to the second step, or the step number 2, where stop the non-opioid and change it to a weak opioid. Example of weak opioid, the commonest example is obviously tramadol. And don't stop the non-opioid. I'm sorry, don't stop the non-opioid. You have to understand that start weak opioid, but also add the non-opioid which you were giving in step 1. So if you're giving tramadol, continue with the ibuprofen or the paracetamol. Don't stop it. And if you have already started him or her, the patient, on any adjuvant, continue with that. Or if you think that you want to add the adjuvant now, you can add in step 2. If the pain is not controlled with step 2, then obviously we move to step 3. In step 3, we stop the weak opioid and start a strong opioid. The commonest example is obviously morphine or fentanyl. But do remember that don't stop the non-opioid which you have started in step 1. And obviously continue with the adjuvant if you have already started so. So next slide. As I said, the most commonest example of non-opioids are the NSAIDs, ibuprofen and diclofenac, or paracetamol. We need to understand that the maximum dose of paracetamol which we can give is 1 gram 6 hourly. So 4 gram is the maximum tolerance of maximum dose of paracetamol which we can prescribe. Next slide. The weak opioids, I think I've already told tramadol. The other common drug which we use is codeine. And next slide, when we talk of strong opioids, I think the most commonest strong opioids which we used are morphine and fentanyl. Fentanyl is most commonly used as a transdermal fentanyl patches, which we use in our daily practice. Now, a few words on morphine. Next slide is that morphine obviously is a strong opioid, and it should classically be given with a non-opioid. So with the step 1. So the starting dose of morphine is 5 to 10 mg 4 hourly. So generally morphine tablet comes as 10 mg tablets. We generally start as 5 or 10 mg tablet, and it has to be given every 4 hourly. So if we give the first dose at 6 o'clock, the next dose will be at 10 o'clock in the morning, then at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, then at 6 o'clock in the afternoon, and then ultimately at 10 o'clock at night. And at night, when you give the bedtime dose, consider giving it as a double dose. So if you have started as 10 mg, give 20 mg so that the patient does not have to wake up in midnight for their next dose. And also, we need to understand that this will not be enough. In between, you should write as 10 mg SOS, so that if the patient has breakthrough pain, the patient will take the morphine accordingly. So if the patient has taken morphine at 10 o'clock in the morning, the next dose will be at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. In between, at 12 o'clock at noon, if the patient has pain, he or she can take another 1 tablet of morphine, but the next dose will remain the same at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. So, and we need to understand that there is no maximum dose for morphine. And if the pain is not relieved satisfactorily, increase by 50% from the next day. And the adverse effects of morphine are nausea, vomiting. Next slide. Nausea, vomiting, drowsiness, and constipation. These are the 3 most important side effects. So whenever you are prescribing morphine, make sure that you always prescribe an antiemetic, at least for the first few days. At least for the first 3 to 5 days, always prescribe an antiemetic. And what antiemetic? Ideally, the antiemetic should be a D2 receptor. I'll come to it in the next slide. And the patient always should be given a laxative, because morphine we know causes constipation. So when you prescribe morphine, a laxative and an antiemetic should always be prescribed along with it. Next slide. Yeah. So it can be the analgesic. Analgesia can be given by orally, by rectal route, by transdermal route, as we know for fentanyl. Subcutaneous route is also preferred in palliative patients, and obviously the IV route. Next slide. Now, when we start a patient on any oral analgesic, please remember that it will take at least 30 minutes for the oral analgesic to start. Morphine, for example, if you start, it will take at least 30 minutes if you start orally. On the other hand, if you start with a IV preparation, the action will start within 10 minutes. And transdermal fentanyl patches will start acting with at least it will take 12 to 24 hours to act, and it has to be changed after every 72 hours. So fentanyl patches must be changed every 3 days. And around the clock scheduling is very important for adequate control of pain. Next slide. We have to titrate the dose aggressively. Patients where the pain is severe and it is not controlled, please consider doubling the dose if it is not controlled. For example, if you have started with morphine 10 mg 4 hourly, and next day you visit the patient and the patient says that my pain is still severe and has not decreased, just don't think, increase the dose by 50 to 100%. So make it at least 15 mg or 20 mg 4 hourly for adequate relief of pain. And if the pain and the patient says that yes, there is reduction of pain, but still moderate pain is there, then think of increasing the dose by 25 to 50% of the dose with which you have started. And patients in whom toxicity develops, stop the dose of analgesia for the next 2 to 3 days or 2 to 3 doses, and resume again resume with 50 to 75% of the dose reduction. Next slide. So the side so the side effects, I think we just discussed constipation. So whenever you are prescribing morphine, always prescribe a laxative, a stimulant laxative like Senoside or Bisacodyl. The commonest which we use is Dalculax, which is a Bisacodyl, and 10 mg orally at night. However, if you find that it is still not enough, you can give it as BD dose, Dalculax 2 times or even 3 times in a day. And patients with severe constipation, along with a stimulant laxative, please consider adding lactulose or milk of magnesia or enema, because at times morphine can cause really severe constipation. So we have to keep that in mind. The next slide. is another side effect is the nausea and the vomiting, because we need to understand that they trigger the CTZ receptor, and that is why antiemetic must be applied, and it is the D2 receptor antagonist, antidopaminergic receptor, dopaminergic antiemetics like Stametil or metoclopramide, that is Reglan, are the drug of choice. Okay, so always an antiemetic has to be prescribed when we are prescribing morphine. Next slide. Yeah, so other co-analgesic might also be used if the patient has other associated pain, like bone pain or soft tissue pain. We might use other co-analgesics. Sometimes the patient might have acute nerve compression, which might due to which he or she might complain of pain. At that time, steroids has to be used, or patients with severe headache because of increased ICT, their dexamethasone has to be used, as we know. Okay, next slide. Now, when we talk of the adjuvant, we generally, when we talk of the adjuvant, which we have seen in step 1 and step 2 or step 3, it is generally used to take care of the neuropathic pain, and the for the control of the neuropathic pain, the two most commonly used adjuvants are the tricyclic antidepressants. The commonest which I use in my practice is amitriptyline, which comes as Triptomar. So that is one of the most commonly used TCAs for neuropathic pain, and the other commonly used are the anticonvulsants like pregabalin or gabapentin, which is used and approved for diabetic neuropathy and also for the treatment of post-herpetic neuralgia. So tricyclic antidepressants and anticonvulsants are the commonly used adjuvants in this scenario. Next slide. The other topic which I just wanted to touch on is the role of bisphosphonates in pain management. Bisphosphonate is something which we commonly used, zoledronic acid or ibandronic acid in our daily practice. We need to understand that bisphosphonates are actually pyrophosphate analogs. They have high affinity for the calcium ions and rapidly bound to hydroxyapatite in bone, where they remain for months. Bisphosphonates are released and taken up by the osteoclasts, interfering with their function. Osteoclasts actually are the bone destructing cells. So what happens is that bisphosphonates go and they interfere with the normal action of the osteoclast. So thus bisphosphonates help to counter the cancer-related increase in number and activity of the osteoclast. And they are used in tumor-induced hypercalcemia to reduce the SRE or the skeletal-related events associated with osteolytic bone metastasis, osteoporosis, and Paget's disease. The side effects which we should keep in mind is renal toxicity. So whenever you are giving a bisphosphonate, always check the calcium and the creatinine. And the other commonest side effect is jaw osteonecrosis. So these are the two things which we should keep in mind while prescribing bisphosphonate. Next slide. The other common drug which we use in our daily practice is denosumab. We know it is a monoclonal antibody, and it reduces the osteoclast number and function, thereby reducing the bone resorption and cancer-induced bone destruction. It is superior to zoledronic acid in preventing the skeletal-related events in metastatic bone cancer. When we consider denosumab generally in aromatase inhibitor-induced bone loss, we give it as prophylactic dose of 60 mg subcut every 6 months. In skeletal-related events, it is 120 mg every month. And in hypercalcemia, it is again 120 mg subcut every 4 weeks or every 1 month. Okay. So next slide. The other procedures for management of pain can be the surgical procedures like nerve block. I won't go into the details of this. So those can also be used for adequate pain management. Okay. Next, the next slide. Yeah. So the next topic which I have been asked to present is on dyspnea. Now, why dyspnea? Because it is one of the most commonest symptoms with which patients present in advanced cancer. And if we see that 70% of the patient in their last 1 to 1.5 months of life in our practice, they present with dyspnea. Next slide. So so if you see, about 70% of the patients during the last 6 weeks of life, they will have some sort of breathing difficulty. Okay, next slide. And obviously, as the days passes and the terminal illness progresses, the incidence or the prevalence of dyspnea increases. Next, we need to understand that how well do we treat dyspnea? Well, it has been found that less than 50% of the patients were treated effectively. So the way we treat dyspnea is still perhaps not in the best way, because most of the patients, they do not get the proper treatment which is required. So next slide. When we think of dyspnea, there can be many causes. It can be due to the primary condition. It can be due to the cancer itself. It can be due to treatment related, or it can be due to psychological. What is the example of the cancer itself? It can be due to the lung tumor itself. It can be due to ascites. It can be due to hepatomegaly, where the liver is involved. It can also be related to treatment related. For example, in chemotherapy, when you are giving drugs like bleomycin, it can cause pneumonitis. When you are giving drugs like adriamycin, that can cause cardiac complication. These all can result in dyspnea. So it can, or in radiation-induced fibrosis. So it can be treatment related, and at the same time, it can also be psychological, like due to anxiety or depression. So how do we treat? Next slide. There are the approach to a dyspneic patient in palliative setting, two basic interventions: the non-specific or the symptom-oriented, and the disease-specific. So next slide. So what do we mean by the non-specific, simple, symptom-oriented? Is simple measures like assure the patient that we will take care, make him or her sit up or semi-reclined position, open the window, don't put in a suffocated room, put on the fan. So these are the simple measures which can be taken in managing a dyspneic patient in the palliative care setting. Next slide. We have to understand whether the dyspnea is because of oxygen, that is hypoxic or non-hypoxic, whether it is because of opioids. And we have to understand the role of opioids in this setting. Okay, so I'll come to this in details. Next slide. And treat the cause of dyspnea where possible. So if it is due to pleural effusion, the pleural tapping has to be done. If it is due to heart failure, we have to treat accordingly. Infection, we have to treat accordingly. Next slide. The commonest medications which we obviously use are the corticosteroids in superior vena cava obstruction or radiation pneumonitis, and the antibiotics accordingly, the bronchodilators which we use. Now, the next slide. The one thing which we should know, that in a palliative care setting, opioids have a very big role because of central reduction in perception of dyspnea, reduced ventilatory response to hypercapnia. It also has an anxiolytic effect. Now, how do we start? In opioid naive patient, start with morphine 2.5 mg, give 6 to 4 hourly. And patients who are already on opioids, if they have severe dyspnea, give the same dose of opioids every 4 hourly. If they have moderate dyspnea and on opioids, consider 50 to 100% of the dose every 4 hourly. And if they have mild dyspnea, consider 25 to 50% of the dose. So please make note that opioids like morphine have a big role in dyspnea in the palliative care setting. The other drug which we commonly use is benzodiazepine like lorazepam. It is used when the dyspnea is generally associated with anxiety, which we see in most of the cases. So we generally give lorazepam about 0.5 to 2 mg for acute episodes. Midazolam can also be used. Next. The other thing which we should know here is the death rattle, which we see in the final hours when the patient, in the final hours of their life. So we are all familiar with that sound. So for that, adequate positioning, anti-secretory agents like scopolamine can be used. So these are the atropine, glycopyrrolate. These are the commonest drugs which can be used in the death rattle, that is the congestion in the final hours. Okay. And we should consider suctioning if secretions are distressing or they're accessible to take it out. Okay. So next. The other common symptom which we see is anxiety in the palliative care setting. It manifests as a complex of physical and psychological symptoms reflecting fear, worry, and apprehension. And it often stems from uncertainty because the patient is uncertain about what is going to happen to him or her, and fear of the future. They're obviously thinking about death, and so they are thinking about what will happen to them, what will happen to their families, and the threat of separation from the loved ones. Manifestations, as we know, can be insomnia, dizziness, tremor, headache, nightmares, dry mouth, dysphagia. These are the commonest side effects. How do we correct it? Correct the correctables, review the drug regimen if any drug is causing anxiety, relieve the pain. Might be the pain is causing anxiety, might be it is because of shortness of breath, and non-drug treatment, general support, assure the patient, good communication between the patient and the doctor or the patient on the sisters, a listening ear. Because remember one thing, a trouble shared is a trouble half. So when we listen to the patient and listen to their problems and share with them, then half of their problem is solved. So listening here is very important, and the health professional task is to help the patient adjust in the best possible way. Other forms of therapy like relaxation therapy, art therapy by a multi-professional team can also be very useful. Next, when we have to next slide, when we in some patients we have to think of psychological support. If it is not enough, we have to prescribe drugs which shall be tailored accordingly. Benzodiazepines are the commonest, diazepam, oral lorazepam, and SSRIs, that is a selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors. If the prognosis is more than 2 to 4 weeks, especially if associated with panic attacks, anxiety, or depression, like citalopram. Okay, so these are the commonest drugs which are used. The other common symptoms which we see in palliative care setting is anorexia, which is obviously poor appetite. Now, we need to understand why most of the patients, they have anorexia. In our practice, we see patients coming and telling that we don't feel hungry. One of the commonest reason is in cancer and many other chronic disease, there is increased expression of cytokines like interleukin alpha and TNF alpha, interleukin 1 and TNF alpha in the hypothalamus. Now, because of which, what happens, it inhibits the hypothalamic response to the fasting signals, and it inhibits the oxytocin neurons. That is, these are the neurons which make you feel hungry, the orexigenic neurons, and it stimulates the anorexigenic neurons. So that is the reason patients complains of anorexia. And sometimes the patient says that I look forward to my meals, but then after a few mouthfuls, I feel full and I cannot eat anymore. So early satiety and without anorexia can happen in some conditions like post-gastrectomy patients who have a small stomach or in ascites or hepatomegaly. The commonest drugs which are used are corticosteroids like dexamethasone or prednisolone, and progestogen can also be used under these settings. Next slide. The other common symptom which I want to discuss here is delirium. Delirium is seen in about 80 to 85% of the patient at end of life, and there are some diagnostic criteria of delirium. Number one is a disturbance in attention. Number two is change in cognition. Number three, disturbance develops over a very short period, that is hours to days, and very evident from the history, physical examination, or the lab finding, and it is very common towards the end of life. It is generally reversible, except those in those where it happens very close to death. Okay, next slide. Now, next slide. Yeah. So the clinical features of delirium, it can be a hyperactive delirium, a hypoactive delirium, or mixed delirium. In hyperactive, the patient is generally restless, agitated. In hypoactive, on the other hand, the patient is psychomotor retardation, lethargy, and or it can be a mixed. That is, at one time he or she has hyperactive features and then followed by lethargy. So it can be of different types. The delirium factors, it is the delirium threshold is lowered in extremes of age, dementia, visual or hearing impairment, and other causes. And there are some precipitating factors like change of environment, unfamiliar stimuli, uncontrolled symptoms like pain, fecal retention, urinary retention, primary or secondary brain tumors, and paraneoplastic syndromes. Certain drugs can also cause, like opioids, benzodiazepines, corticosteroids, chemotherapy, and obviously in withdrawal, like alcohol and nicotine. Next slide. Management of delirium. Correct the correctables. If the delirium is because of bladder retention or fecal impaction, treat accordingly. Non-drug treatment, family counseling, they have to be ensured, the family, that don't worry, the patient is not losing their mind. It is a pathological condition which will become better. Help the patient express their distress, continue the treatment, and please respect the patient with courtesy. Keep calm and avoid confrontation. Drug treatment, antipsychotics in agitated, hypoactive, and mixed delirium. Haloperidol is commonly used. Other drugs which can be used are olanzapine. Okay. So next slide. So yeah, nausea and vomiting. Next. Next. So next slide. I will just do it fast because I think already we have 40 minutes or more time we have already spent. So
There was a problem, so you can take 5 minutes more.
Okay. So Jibok, please go through the slides fast. Next slide. Next. Yeah. So why? Because 20 to 30% of the patients will experience nausea with advanced cancer, and 70% in the last week of life. It is very common in the terminal stage, and almost all cancers which we see patients presents with nausea and vomiting at some point of their time or the other. Next slide. So we need to understand that the pathways of nausea and vomiting. However, in very short, there are special receptor zones. One is the CTZ, or the chemotherapy chemoreceptor trigger zone, CTZ, which is in the area postrema of the floor of the fourth ventricle, and there is no blood-brain barrier in this area. The other center is the vomiting center, which is in the medulla, and the other is the medullary antiemetic tone. Next slide. So this is the chemoreceptor trigger zone. The CTZ, which is in the area postrema, and there is no blood-brain barrier. The other is in the medulla oblongata. So next slide. Yeah, so I have already told this. Next. Yeah. So what this is the act of, yeah. So this is the act of vomiting. I think we all know that the stomach squeezes, the lower esophageal sphincter, it relaxes, the soft palate, it closes, the glottis, it closes, and the vomiting actually takes place. And if you go to the next slide, you will see that it is very important to know actually that which is the area which is affected, because accordingly we will prescribe our medications. So if we look at the CTZ, okay, or the chemoreceptor trigger zone, the two most important receptors here are the D2 and the 5-HT3. Okay. Now, what is the example of a 5-HT3 antagonist? The example of a 5-HT3 antagonist has been commonly used in our back. Okay, I'll come to this one by one. Next slide. Yeah. Now, if you see in the other, so in CTZ, the two most important are the D2 and the 5-HT3. And here in the vomiting center, that is in the medulla, it is histamine, acetylcholine, and 5-HT2. Okay. Next. And in the cerebral cortex, the two important are the GABA, the 5-HT, and the mechanoreceptors in the meninges. Next, the other receptors are in the vestibular system. Next slide. And in the vestibular system, the two most important receptors are acetylcholine and histamine 1. Okay, next slide. So, yeah. So this is in gist what we just showed is that in the CTZ, the two important receptors are the D2 and the 5-HT3. In the vomiting center, it is the histamine and the acetylcholine, and in this is the GABA receptors. And in the vestibular complex, it is the acetylcholine and histamine 1. Next. Yeah. Next slide. Yeah. Next. Next. Next slide. Yeah. So, yeah, I think we can skip these slides. We can skip this slide. Yeah, please skip these slides. We'll go to, yeah. So management. Okay. So correct the correctable. Obviously, the pharmacological measures I'll come, and the non-pharmacological measures. So next slide. So what are the non-pharmacological measure? Sometimes we see that, especially when we go to patient's home for home visits, patient complaint of nausea and vomiting, and we see that perhaps they are staying in a one room or a very small room where the cooking was also taking place. So might be that cooking smell is causing the nausea and the vomiting. So avoid the cooking smell. Attention to unpleasant odor. Small attractive meal should be given. Sometimes on seeing the sight of a heavy meal only, they feel nausea and vomiting. And cold drinks are preferred over any hot drinks. Okay, next. Next slide. Next slide. Yeah. So the when we talk about the pharmacological method, it is all about blocking the receptors at the various sites. Okay. So next slide. Next slide. Yeah. So as we have seen that in the CTZ, it is the D2 and the 5-HT3 antagonist. Next slide. So one of the commonest drug which we use Next, yeah, is metoclopramide. Now, metoclopramide will actually inhibit the D2 receptor, so it will work in the CTZ. Okay. However, metoclopramide can also inhibit 5-HT3 in high doses. Okay, when we start with, and the commonest example of metoclopramide is Reglan. When we start with metoclopramide, start with a 10 mg dose every 4 to 6 hourly. So make sure that when you start with a metoclopramide, it has to be given at least 6 hourly, and you can reach a maximum dose of 100 mg per day. Generally given as oral. However, a subcutaneous route is also preferred in palliative setting. And do keep in mind that EPS or extrapyramidal syndrome is one of the side effects of metoclopramide, which we can see in a few patients. Next, the other drug is haloperidol. It is again, next slide. It is again a D2 receptor antagonist used in opioid-induced. Yeah, used in opioid-induced nausea and vomiting. And starting dose is about 1.5 to 3 milligram 3 times a day. Can be given per orally, subcutaneous or IV. And maximum dose which can be given in 24 hours about 20 mg. Okay. The third commonest drug which we give is ondansetron, which we used. Next slide, yeah. Which we use is ondansetron. Now, ondansetron is a 5-HT3 receptor antagonist. Will work very well in chemotherapy, abdominal radiotherapy, or intestinal obstruction. So this is the reason why ondansetron is one of the most commonest drugs which is used in chemotherapy-induced nausea and vomiting. Make sure that it has to be given every 8 hourly, and the starting dose is 4 milligrams to 8 milligrams. Generally, we start with 8 milligrams 8 hourly. Can be given per oral or through the IV route. Headache and constipation is the commonest side effect. The other drug which we often used is dexamethasone in this setting, mainly used to reduce the increased ICT, reduces the peritumoral edema. We generally start with a dose of 8 mg BD or 16 mg daily for about 3 days. And then subsequently, obviously over time, we have to taper off the dose of dexamethasone. Next. So the next is benzodiazepine, which is a GABA antagonist and used in anticipatory nausea and vomiting. Example is lorazepam. Next. So this next slide. So this slide, next slide, will actually give you a very good idea. Whether if it is next slide, if it is previous slide. Yeah. So if it is opioid-induced vomiting, we have to think of using metoclopramide or haloperidol. So when we are prescribing morphine, please do prescribe metoclopramide or haloperidol, not 5-HT3 antagonist. On the other hand, in chemotherapy-induced nausea and vomiting, it is ondansetron and dexamethasone. In renal failure, haloperidol is the drug of choice. In raised ICT, dexamethasone is the drug of choice. So these are the few things which we have to keep in mind. Next. So in short, nausea and vomiting, the cause can be multifactorial. Correct the correctable, non-pharmacological treatment, drug treatment, and combinations are more useful. And the route of administration has to be chosen wisely. Next. So the last slide is. So the last slide is after so much discussion, still we find that there are certain barriers to palliative care. The palliative care is still not widely used. Still, we will see that physicians of other branches, they seldomly refer patients to palliative care. So why is it? So the key barriers to palliative care integration are, there are 3 which I have listed. Number 1 is education. Lack of adequate education or training and perception of palliative care as end of life care. When we think of palliative care, most of the physicians in other fields, they still think of palliative care as end of life care. Number two is the implementation domain, that is inadequate size of the palliative medicines. That is, the trained workforce is still very less. We don't have experts. We still don't have specialists. A challenge of identifying the patients appropriate for palliative care referral. Most of the physicians, they don't know when to refer the patient, and need for culture change across the setting. And the third is the policy domain, that is the fragmented healthcare system. We need more funds and lack of adequate reimbursement for palliative care and regulatory basis. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Sona, for such a nice presentation. It is a vast topic, and you have highlighted all the major important aspects of it. So, this will there schedule a question and answer session, and you can see in the chat box there is no question as such. If any of the participants have any question, you can still type it in the chat box. So there is one question from Abhay Chakraborty. What is the difference, I think, between the best supportive care and hospice? Dr. Saurabh? Are you there?
Hello.
Yes.
Yeah. So see, we need to understand hospice care is a. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. So hospice care is a type of healthcare that focuses on the palliation of terminally ill patients' pain and symptoms towards the end of life. Okay. Now, what does it mean when a patient is put on hospice? It means that the care is designed to give supportive care to people in the final phases of terminal illness. Whereas in palliative care, it is not about just the terminal illness. We are thinking of, as I told, palliative care should be integrated from the very beginning of any treatment of any chronic illness. Whereas hospice is to give the supportive care in the final phases of their life. And the goal is to enable the patients to be comfortable and free of pain so that they can live each day as fully as possible. So it is mainly for the patients who are dying, especially from cancer. So this is the main difference between a hospice and a palliative care. Palliative care is not only for the terminally ill patients towards their end of life, but hospice is mainly for patients who are approaching the end of life phase.
Okay. So another comment and question in this is that under what circumstances can we consider using corticosteroid for anorexia?
Yeah, as I said, corticosteroids can be used as we know. Whenever you will see that, whenever we use corticosteroids, the patient has a very good feeling, and the patients will come and tell that, we feel hungry. So it should not be used in, as in regular, what do you call, in regular, as regularly, because you have to encourage the patients to eat, as I said, small, frequent meals, not big meals. But corticosteroids are beneficial in treating anorexia in palliative care patients with malignancy. However, there is no evidence that, that they can be given in other non-malignant causes also, but they can be given. And in most of the patients, steroids are used due to different other causes in end of life care. So we will find that, corticosteroids actually, they have a role. but it is not prescribed for every patient, so you have to use judicially.
Okay. To the previous question, Dr. Abhishek Basu has added another comment that in addition to what has been explained by Dr. Rugo, base supportive care is not always practical. Okay. So, any other question? If there is no other question, then this session would have been followed by another doubt clearing session and question answer session. But as within the stipulated time we did not get any questions, we will be cancelling the session. And with this, we have come to the end of the module as well as the clinical oncology course, which has been conducted from January 16. And it was a very comprehensive course, and we hope that our target audience, who are the JR1 and JR2 particularly, have been benefited to some extent from this course. Our course coordinator, Dr. Kazim Manir, is not here today for unavoidable circumstances. I would request our Joint Secretary ARY West Bengal Chapter, Dr. Abhishek Basu, to give concluding remarks or any announcement, if any, to be made. Dr. Abhishek Basu.
Thank you, Monideepa. I hope I'm audible. So I just wanted to say that it has been a wonderful course, and thanks to all the faculty and the residents who have been part of this course. So I would just want to add that it is, I think, a little bit surprising that we didn't have any questions for the course today. But anyway, people are free to ask questions by mailing, as Dr. Jyotiru Goswami has already said, to the mail ID that is dedicated. And I think I would again thank all of you, and the evaluation for the course would be given to you. The procedure for the evaluation would be shared very shortly. And we would hope that that would again help all the residents, and then we would also give a certification that was promised, which is already with us from the West Bengal Medical Council. So with this, I would like to formally thank everyone, including the entire executive committee and the team that has worked relentlessly for this course, especially Dr. Kazi, Dr. Jibok, Dr. Shuranjan, Dr. Kaustav, and Dr. Onupam, who have been meticulous for making this course a resounding success. So thank you once again, and good night.
Thank you, Dr. Abhishek Basu. So our usual academic activities will go on till we come up with another such course primarily targeting for the residents. Till then, thank you.